Oh, hi, everyone. Welcome to SPC 44. I hope you guys are enjoying your morning, and I hope you're all having fun with the conference. I'm really glad you guys are here. My name is Vaidi. I'm a program manager in the SharePoint search team. A little bit more about what I exactly do at Microsoft. I've been in the core engineering team that's been responsible for rethinking and improving our offerings on the crawl side. And today we're going to talk about why exactly we're enterprise search. I mean, we try to demystify, are we indeed enterprise search, or we just search? Because to be enterprise search, you're bringing in content from different kinds of repositories. Before I get started, quick survey. How many people are new to SharePoint search and the product, and don't have any existing SharePoint search product that's running at your company back home? Okay. Just one. Okay. And how many of you are familiar with search administration concepts related to crawling? Oh, wow. Cool. So that takes about 10% of my slides. So I've just one disclaimer. I think you all already know this, but we've had a pretty sucky network. So I spent last evening pretty much taking snapshots of how to build a connector. So if I can't connect while my demo comes up, then you're going to get to see me walk through fancy pictures only. And you'll have to believe me that it actually works. Okay. As for goals, I know that this is a dev-centric session, but wanted to make sure that we covered all ends here. When it comes to SharePoint and enterprise search, we have three different people that we're going to target. One is the information worker. The information worker is really most concerned about how fast the SharePoint search system is like. So their question is more around, hey, I have this document that I've uploaded. I want my colleagues to be able to search for it as fast as possible. So what they're most interested in is how fast does SharePoint search really work. The second person on the screen and that we'll talk to is the IT admin. These are the folks that information workers would get in touch with if there's a trouble. So if there's a document that they're not able to search for, then they get in touch with the IT admin. And the IT admin is also responsible for making sure that the farm health is up there. And we want to. I know that a lot of IT admins would love to get really geeky, but one of the things that we focused on this release is make it very, very easy for people to isolate and diagnose issues and fix problems. And the third audience and the third goal in the session is, are we indeed a search everything kind of a solution? What does it mean to actually be search everything kind of a solution? A quick primer for those that aren't completely familiar so that we're all on the same page on terminologies that we use. This is a very dumbed-down illustration, so you guys are going to see many more of this kind of illustrations in other sessions, so no extra credit for people that know how the inner workings of the system. But essentially what a search system looks like is you have a bunch of hosts that have content, and you have connectors and indexing connectors specifically that go retrieve that content. And on the left side, you see the crawl system, and that's the system that's responsible for having the logic of how do I have a conversation with the repository, how do I do incremental crawls, how do I do full crawls and security crawls, etc. And then you have the processing engine. This is the familiar fast engine, where we have things like word breakers and doc parsers that actually do the work before it gets pushed into the index, and then it's query ready. Now, the other way we can do this is if you have a large repository that already has an index, then rather than trying to build a solution ground up to go crawl and retrieve and index that content, you can just you can do query federation and bring results from there. Now, at this point, I actually want to call out some of the related sessions. So in this particular session, we'll be talking about indexing connectors and crawlers. And we have sessions that are spread across the entire spectrum of SharePoint search. Later today, you have, in case anyone's interested in hybrid, well, you guys are actually out of luck because there was a session at 9 o'clock and there's a session going on right now. Don't run now, though. And for those that are interested in people search And that's the far right, how do I do people search, what kind of customizations are available. There's a really cool session at 1:30 by Sana and Mikhail. And Katrina, Runar, and Nilspetter are presenting later today at about 5. And that's where we get into the guts of the system where, what does processing engine look like, what are the flows, and what kind of extensibility is built in. And then on just before the UI side, you see that little arrow where there's query, and there's a query engine. And we have some really good, solid customizations called query rules that help you configure the system to give you the exact kind of results you want. So, if for example, if you're looking for camera bags, you don't want the system to come and retrieve or give you back information like documents that have camera and bags. You're actually looking for items that are like camera bags. So query rules is being covered by Pedro tomorrow, and so is relevance, which is related to the same area by tomorrow by Victor. So there are some really cool sessions that sort of join the entire picture. So be sure to attend that. I'm going to jump into a quick demo. This is less of a demo, more of a walkthrough of what the system looks like. Those that are not familiar, just some concepts that are there in the search administration. Again, so when you install SharePoint Search, this is the UI that's going to invite you. Of course, this is a fully baked system. This is an example of a large enterprise which has got about 100 million items. And so this is your admin console. And right on the top, what you would see over here is very high-level system status, like is the system currently in backup mode or is it actually running? What is the ongoing crawl rate and how many items are there in the index? And below this, you have a very, very detailed representation of the topology, and you have quick and easy ways of identifying if your topology is healthy or not. And if you want to know more about this, Olaf and Barry are presenting later today as well on how to scale out your system. On the left nav over here, you will see tools that will help you diagnose problems that are there in the search system. So there are crawl logs and crawl health reports that help you look into the system and see if the system is performing or if you've run into issues. And you have configuration stuff like you want to go define a content source. For those unfamiliar, the first thing that you do when you start crawling information is you go define a logical unit called a content source that helps you manage the different repositories that you're going to go bring back. So it's an administrative unit. And you have things like a crawl rule that help you define whether you want to actually traverse or not traverse a content source. So when it comes to enterprise, the one thing I missed explaining, the difference between the mental model of an enterprise search and an internet search engine. In the case of an enterprise search, it gets a little bit more complicated in that you're not just going after pages and traversing links that are inside of them, but you're dealing with a couple of other things, like you may have a repository that's not built like a website, and you want to be able to exploit the hierarchy of the repository, whether it's SharePoint or Documentum. And the other thing is, in the case of internet-facing websites, the capacity plan is built for hundreds and millions of customers users to be able to hit the site. Whereas when you have inside of your company, you may have sites that only have maybe one or two front ends. So any kind of an enterprise search engine that is built with crawling infrastructure built in really has to take into consideration, search citizenship. You can't just hit that server 100 times a day. So that's the second thing. And then the third is, when it comes to internet searching sites, internet-facing sites, you don't have the concept of security as much. It's all public-facing information. Now, when it comes to enterprise search engines, you're really looking at very, very granular and very complex authorization models that exist. The authorization model could be as simple as Windows NT type, allow, deny, or it could be something very complex, like allow people to access only between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. if they're running BitLocker and stuff like that. So any enterprise search engine should scale to those kind of requirements. So that's what the search admin page looks like for those unfamiliar. Okay, the first thing that I want to get into is SharePoint Search 2013, is it really fast, and how fast is it? And let me start with a very simple illustration here. This is the mental model of what a crawl looks like. If you define if you have a crawling component that goes and retrieves content, What you typically do is you have a full crawl and an incremental crawl. A full crawl goes and retrieves the content. For the first time, it does a complete discovery from top to bottom. And then, rather than trying to do this over and over again, you would configure something called an incremental crawl that just goes against either a change log, or it looks at timestamped files since the last crawl and only retrieves them. Now, previously, what we used to have is the concept of scheduling incremental crawls at different schedules to meet the needs of the business. So if you had one or two sites or one or two repositories that were of higher importance, you would put that at 30-minute incremental crawl, and the ones that are not quite as important, you would configure maybe once a day or once every other day, because people are not really looking to go search for information that much out of those repositories. So this is the conventional and typical mental model. But what actually lands up happening, and for those that have been search admins, you would agree, isn't quite that. What happens is you have different types of changes that result in different behaviors inside of the system. So let's say an employee joins today, and I have to give them access to all the content in one ginormous site. So I'm going to go at the web app level or at the host level, and I'm going to add that person. Now, that one change essentially means the search system has to go back into the index and retrieve every document that's associated with that host and update the authorization model for that. And what happens because of this is the incremental crawls that you expect is going to run for 30 minutes may run for 24 hours. And this was a big problem. Because what this lands up doing is a crawl is typically like a FIFO model. So if you have a change, that's going to get taken care of before the next change can be processed. And it's a serialized model, and it affects freshness of the index. And people typically will have the black dotted line over there is your crawl schedule, and you're typically expecting the freshness of the index to be in and around that. But when you run into deep changes, all of a sudden your system is going to go out of whack. It will stabilize, but there is a period of time there that your employees are not going to see the kind of freshness that they would otherwise see. So what we did in 2013 was we basically redesigned how we thought of the crawl. We came up with the concept of a continuous crawl, where we tried to address the kind of problems that cause this kind of discrepancy. The kind of problems that cause discrepancy in freshness is you run into errors. Say a host blips for, say, 5 minutes, and all of a sudden the crawl system just keeps on hitting it, and then after a while it just says, okay, I can't crawl anything over here. I'm going to mark the entire host as, I've got to come back to this guy. And what that means is the next time he comes back for an incremental crawl, he's going to do a full deep crawl of that. So errors is one big problem. The second big problem is that you have security, the one that I just now mentioned. And so the way we addressed this is we took the crawling infrastructure and re-envisioned this. So we have a continuous crawl that essentially brings in parallelized crawling, and it's a light version of a crawl. It's not the crawl that does everything. It addresses the need of the business in the now. So it only takes care of changes that are currently going on. So it'll wake up, say, every so minutes, and in the out-of-the-box case, it's every 15 minutes. A very light version of a crawl will wake up and go talk to all the repositories that have been configured and find out if there are changes. And it'll only process changes. It won't try to go process any errors that have previously been identified. And if there's a security update, it'll handle it on a different pipeline. So what happens is the most important changes that are happening in the now get priority. And as a result of that, you get consistent freshness. And because of the fact that it's parallelized, you don't have one deep change affecting, having a snowball effect. So this is my hacky way of illustrating this, where you have in the course of, say, a 24-hour period, you may have a 1-hour time where someone goes and changes the title of a list. And that list has, say, 20,000 items. Now, that is not going to result in the snowball effect of every little change that you did after that is not going to wait. The next guy that comes along is going to go find the new changes and going to go process that, while the one that's processing the deep changes is taking care of the one that I just mentioned before that. So the CC2 or CC1 would land up, CC3 would offload all the deep changes into CC2. And so what happens on the right chart is you get way better freshness. Now, to put some numbers to this, on in 2010, the freshness targets or the freshness numbers that we used to see were in the range of 4 to 8 hours for a large enterprise system. And sometimes it would go off to 36 hours because of the serialization problems that I spoke about. Because of continuous scroll, we have consistently in the last 6 months, for a corpus that's 100 million size, with about a 1% change rate, which is a rather aggressive change rate for a repository, we're seeing less than 30-minute freshness. That is a huge, huge improvement. Now, mind you, the corpus that I'm talking about over there is a very distributed corpus. It's not one which has got light files. It's one that's got PowerPoints that are 4 MB in size, Excel files that are like maybe 300 MB, and it's just a wide distribution. Video files are in there. Now, we had a contrasting prototype where we did this for internet business-facing sites, where it's just catalog items, where it's just very small, bite-sized files. There, we were able to configure and achieve freshness of under 1 minute. And so freshness is a huge win in 2013.
Does all the content have to be in SharePoint?
Thank you for bringing that up. You stole my thunder there. So that basically, well, yeah, this is V1, and so we targeted SharePoint this time because and there's a reason for that. We wanted to make sure that we found the sweet spot of being able to find a light crawl that goes after the repository and doesn't make too many requests. We are considering the continuous crawl as a concept for other repositories in the next release. So in conclusion, as far as continuous crawl is concerned, it's adaptive, it's elastic, you don't have to think about schedule. So those of you who play the role of a search admin, you guys are familiar with trying to schedule your crawls. And you guys are familiar with going back into your search admin page and changing the schedule. So let's say it's summertime and 1 or 2 sites get more hits. So the company meeting site gets more hits. You would go and you would adapt the schedule to make sure that the freshness on that site is better, and you would reduce something else, some other host's schedule. Whereas with continuous crawl, it's one click. You don't bother about what the schedule is, and the system just takes care of it. And yes, as I already mentioned, it's only for SharePoint. And out of the box, we have continuous crawl, the light version, runs every 15 minutes. You can configure it to even a minute. So if you're looking for very aggressive schedules. So what I wanted to demo is one of the really cool diagnostic capabilities that we added, along with the whole freshness feature. So what this is a search freshness report. And this is net new for 2013, and it gives admins a very, very deep view into what's going on inside of the system. So previously, you would only see things like a crawl rate report, and you would have the crawl log, which told you how long a crawl ran. What we wanted to give an admin is a doc-level view of what's going on. So in this particular report, what you're seeing is you have freshness for a 2.5-hour period on yesterday, and it gives you a breakdown per content source. And it tells you what is the aggregate freshness, and it also tells you exactly how many documents were committed for that repository. And it gives you a detailed bucket of what percentage of those documents made it through into the index in less than 10 minutes. So over here, if I just look at SharePoint, you have 52,000 documents that were committed in a 2.5-hour period, of which about 13% were less than 10 minutes fresh. And by the way, the numbers are cumulative, as you had right. And so you have the aggregate freshness, which we define as the 90th percentile, as in what is 90% of documents are at or better than what kind of freshness. And that's how we compute aggregate freshness. And so you see the buckets over here. And why this report is helpful for the admin is twofold. One, where he gets a view into exactly what kind of freshness we are seeing in each repository. And if he wants to go, if he looks at continuous crawl freshness is really good, but I have this repository that I want to add for better freshness, then he can go configure that particular content source or host into continuous crawl. That's one thing you can do. The other thing is, and this is the discovery problem, that many times what a search admin will go and get into is an escalation will come in, and he won't know if it's just a blip, and I shouldn't have to bother about it, or is it indeed something that I have to get into and figure out what's going on. Now, this illustration below the table gives you that information of was it indeed a blip. So every time there's a blip in the system, what will happen is you'll see the red band on the top. That will increase quite a bit, and the green will be really, really small. Now, what you will see as the system starts to recover is the red starts to reduce and the green starts to expand. So it's a visual indicator for the admin to go, things are getting back into normalcy. I don't have to go spin cycles on this. That's 2 to 3 hours of a search admin's time saved by just one very quick illustration. By the way, please feel free to interrupt me if you have any questions on any of these features. Yeah, I'll get into this one later. Yes. It's for all SharePoint content, even 2007 as well. The next thing is, how easy is it to figure out what's going on inside of the system? And if I run into problems, if a document if an employee is not able to find a document, how do I go find out very quickly what's going on? Some of you may be familiar with the kind of tools that are available for search admins. And so we have a toolkit that spreads the entire life cycle of incident management, from notify to diagnose to isolate to resolve. And the pie chart that I drew there is just a sample based on our observation of dog food systems that we run, where exactly are problems like. And this is what we actually wanted to see. We wanted to see fewer number of issues that happen as a result of reliability or any kind of a blip in the system, and it's more to do with network or configuration. That's precisely what we saw as we were dogfooding our own system. And so what we have is, for Notify, we have a SCOM management pack where the events that have been configured into the system are part of the SCOM management pack. It's not in the product. You have to download it from the download center. And that helps you stay notified about issues that are going on. And the other is the Search Admin UI. You may recall that the UI, there's a snapshot view inside of the UI that tells you what's going on, and I'll get into a little more of that now in a bit. The other is the Search Diagnostics. We'll get into that as well. For those that really want to geek out, the ULS viewer is really, it's just down in the guts where you're able to see specific log entries if you're trying to diagnose and isolate issues that you're not able to get to using the reports. And finally, how do you resolve? You have actions can be initiated from within the UI, or you can run PowerShell commandlets as well. So I'm just going to switch over to show you what kind of manageability stuff that we've put into the product this time. So I spoke about what's there on the UI, on the Search Admin homepage, the kind of information that's bubbled up. Let's go into some of the other crawl-specific stuff. And unfortunately, I refreshed this when the system was paused. The system is back up running. I don't want to hit refresh because I don't know what will happen after that. So so this is the content sources page. This is the first place where any admin would come in, see if what we expect is a workflow for an admin. We don't want an admin to go 4 different places to figure out, is everything really fine, or is it something that I got to go spend time in? And so the workflow that we've built is get into the system, see the content sources page, see if your system is running, and see what the current crawl duration is with respect to the last crawl duration. Contextual information is the first way that an admin figures out, do I really have to look further in? So we brought up that contextual information here. And so if everything is A-OK here, you don't have to worry about it. If it was 4 hours yesterday and it's 4 hours of crawl duration today, then things are pretty good. The next place that an admin goes is inside of by the way, this page that I'm showing right now is the content sources page. And this is the crawl log. I'm going to sort of go into some of the crawl log views that we've created and what we've added into those crawl log views so that it becomes easier to identify problems. So this is the crawl log for a search admin that's running 14 different content sources. And you see that you have not just summary statistics like how much of content is there in each of the hosts, but also things like how long did crawls take over different periods of time. Again, this is the information that the admin is looking for to find out, is this particular repository growing or shrinking? The first thing that an admin would want to look at if things are running within a 2 to 3 hour window or plus minus 10% duration, the next thing that the admin's going to go take a look at is it indeed the same size, or did it suddenly shrink? And that's what you get information over here about. Now, for those of you familiar with crawl history, we added a bunch of other stuff. And in the crawl history, we used to have detailed information of each crawl, how long did it take for each repository. And what used to not be available is things like, did something really happen funny in this crawl? We only used to bubble up information like statistics. Like we ran into X amount of errors. What we did not have is what are the root causes of those errors right up on top. So what we added this time around is we added repository latency and we added the crawl rate per crawl incident. So this helps you figure out because the number one driver of issues is repository problems. Not that we're blaming the other guy, but oftentimes what will happen is during rush hour times, you will have repository latency shoot off from milliseconds all the way into seconds. And that becomes the root cause of several problems. And so we wanted to bring that up and show what the crawl rate is as well as repository latency for each instance of crawl. So if up until now, you've figured out that, OK, the duration looks good, and it's not shrinking, and the latency is sort of fine. It's not too bad. It's not great. What do I go do next? And so we added in the crawl. You guys are familiar with the crawl rate, where you get to see what the overall system throughput looks like. And let's say you come here and you see over a 14-hour window, things are sort of stable. Then once again, you have this visual indicator that I'm done here. Now, if you are now trying to figure out, hey, the system started to give throughputs of, say, 10 or 20 DPS. I kind of short-circuited that one there. So the thing that I forgot to mention is that depending on the kind of topology you have, the throughput is variable. And so for the large enterprise system that we have over here, we've configured it to be able to get up to 150 DPS. Now, this is 150 DPS that depends on actually having changes to go process. Once you have done a full crawl, typically you're only bringing in changes, so you may not have enough data to go process at 150 DPS. So this is something that the admin will gather as tribal knowledge as he starts observing the system. So let's say that the admin is looking at this and is expecting about 100 DPS and starts to see that the system is not quite performing well. And this used to be the place where admins would just sort of give up in the past release, because you've run out of options, because you know that it's not a repository, and you see that this throughput is suddenly down. And that is the place where we now added some other nifty reports, and this is the real geek out version. Let me set up before I get into the report, let me give some context. So this is kind of what happens inside of the system, kind of. We have 4 different stages where you have one stage where you're discovering content and you're fetching content from the repository. You have another one which is actually pushing the content into the fast engine, which is the orange. And then the third is where the fast engine is actually doing the processing and putting it into the index. And finally, there's the bookkeeping where we say, hey, everything is A-OK. Now, in the past, you didn't get this view into the system. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to give information that gives the maximum transparency into how the system is architected and where are the potential bottlenecks. Now, like in any kind of a system which is a workflow model, where there are different velocities, you obviously go inject buffers to make sure that if there's overflow, you handle that. And so that's what we've done here. And you will see that there are little buffer spots in each of those sections. And what we've done in the report that we designed around this is show where the maximum number of links are waiting. And that gives you that visual indicator again of where exactly inside of the system are we running into trouble. So if it's blue, and you see the system has got just a lot of links, a lot of things in blue, that means that the gatherer, which is the crawler, we come up with 2 words for everything just to keep everyone on the toes. We have a lot of links in blue. That means they're waiting on the repository. Now, if a lot of things are waiting in the content plugin, it means that you potentially have 2 different servers running in 2 different buildings, or there's some kind of a network problem between the crawl subsystem and the CTS subsystem. So you get to go look at, is there really a network latency there? and you go address that. Or it could also be that the transformation services, the fast engine, is not scaled out enough. And so it's sort of not performing at the speed that it should, and you go and try to add more hardware there. And the same thing is what is shown in terms of submitted to CTS. So if either waiting in content plugin or submitted to CTS are large in number, it means that your system is either not fully scaled out or you have a network issue. And finally, you have SQL, which is what is shown in yellow. That's the bookkeeping part where everything gets done, and we go back and we just make sure that we submit it into SQL where we maintain all of the links. And so if the yellow band goes up, that means, well, SQL's not quite performing very well. So that's the report that gives you that. And the other one we added was the inverse view of that. So when we are looking at bottlenecks, when we are diagnosing bottleneck issues, there are two separate views that help complement one another. One is, hey, there's a workflow, point A, point B, point C, and there's a little buffer in each one to handle overflow. That's one view, and that's the first one we saw. The second is, how much time did a document take in each of these sections to get done processing, excluding the wait time inside of the queues? And so that gives you the most concrete information of, is this indeed a processing bandwidth issue versus a network or something that's a configuration issue? Any questions? This one's a real geek out report, and just FYI, it used that little diagram that we drew. It was drawn after like 3 or 4 months of just sort of hand waving our way through that report. It's one of those reports that are really geeky, but once you get to the point where you know how to use it, you really, it's just a breeze to go past and say, this exactly is the problem. So we're really hoping that the admins out there are going to find this report to be very compelling. Okay, so that's troubleshooting. So the last part of the presentation is around, are we indeed search everything kind of a solution? And what exactly does search everything mean? First of all, it's support for multiple repositories. It's not just a SharePoint search engine, but it's an engine that can go index and give you search results for your entire corpus. And that's a fancy word for enterprise that we came up with. The second is easy extensibility, which means you have a bunch of out-of-box solutions, but you're able to extend it for custom repositories that you've built out there. Things that you may have, sort of hand-stitched. You have this one SQL server that has the authorization model, and you have a little file share. You've hand-stitched together, and you have a website that is able to go pull that information for the users to navigate to, and you want that system to be searchable. And so that's the second part. The third is an integrated development platform, which is, it's not something where you go build something and work through the whole stitching process into the search administration, but it seamlessly sort of is integrated into the manageability model. And the last one is consistent management across all solutions. So we want extensibility where we can leverage the kind of administration and manageability that's available for out-of-box connectors. So that's what really truly makes up a search everything kind of a solution. So going back to the simple illustration, what are the out-of-the-box solutions that we have, and what are some of the custom solutions that we've built, or custom solution that we provide for people that are looking for extensibility? Out of the box, we have connectors for SharePoint, file shares, Lotus Notes, website, people profile. There's even one for sitemap that I haven't covered there. The reason I've put 2 different color code is that they're working against 2 separate APIs. We've traditionally had a protocol handle API, which is native code. For anyone that's familiar with that, just FYI, it's going to be deprecated in 16. What's taking its place is a BCS-based connector framework. For anyone that was at the session right before this, you may have gathered information about how to write BCS modules to read and write content from non-SharePoint repositories. And so we leveraged the same platform to build a search-specific connector framework where you can go build solutions for stuff that's not available out of the box. And go ahead. Out of the box, no. You can build a CMIS. No, I actually do not know that one. I don't know that one. I'll have to find out. I'm not familiar with that. So the other thing we did was we rewrote a bunch of PH-based connectors that we had into a BCS connector framework. So Lotus Notes, Exchange Public Folders, and Documentum. One thing I want to call out here is for those that are interested in Documentum, we have a custom security trimming session that happens tomorrow by Morgan and Sviner. And they're going to go into what custom security trimming features are available. But one of the things we did in this release for Documentum is we added support for trusted content sources. This is the advanced authorization model that I spoke about, where you have not just read-write, but very detailed authorization model. So yeah, so the custom solutions can be built on top of connector framework, and that's I'll demo a quick walkthrough of how to build a custom solution. But before I go into that, just sort of setting context of what exactly is the capabilities that come to the forefront when you think of an indexing connector. And it's a pretty broad spectrum. You're not just talking about crawling. You're talking about things like content security. You're talking about attachment crawls and change-based crawling. And I've listed out a bunch here based and lined them up in terms of complexity. What we have out of the box is connectors that give you these kind of features. And so you'll see that partial update processing is available only for SharePoint, which is actually security-only crawls. We don't do partial updates at content level. So if you have just if you've only changed one part of a file, we don't have partial update processing for that. The partial update here is security-only. So you'll see that SharePoint crawls are the ones that are most expansive in terms of feature set. The connector framework addresses almost all scenarios. So it's able to provide you with the tools to go do a vast majority of the scenarios that you will run into when you're trying to index content. So this is what a simplistic illustration of what the connector framework model looks like. You have search that's running on top. It's got a connector framework. That's the piece of code that runs search-specific calls. It uses BCS to connect with the repository that you're going to write a connector for. And we have two different things here when you talk of custom solutions. One is called a model file, and the other is the custom connector. The model file is the one that has the structure of the host, where you say, let's take a example repository would be for a recruitment scenario. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Yes. The question was, can the search extensibility be used for e-discovery as well? And the answer is yes. Right, so the model file is the one that holds the structure of the repository. So if you take a recruitment scenario where, let's say that candidates who apply, their information is managed in a table in Excel or in SQL, and you have their resumes that are being stored in a file share. So that repository it conceptually has these two entities. And the model file is this way of, you just go and you disconnect yourself from trying to write code that helps you do specific callouts, and instead just think about modeling the data that you want to go pull in. And if you have, like for example, in the case of Documentum, you have a sort of similar model where you have content sitting in one place, in one database, and then the authorization model sitting in a completely different place. And so when you're modeling an indexing connector, you don't try to think of doing individual callouts. Instead, you focus more on just explaining where the file sits and where the equivalent ACL or the access control list sits for that repository. And the second thing that people will have to do is build the connector code. These are search-specific methods, and this is where there's information like what is the authorization that you would use, and what is the call out that should happen for incremental and for full crawl. So if you're doing a full crawl, you would just start at the top, and you just have to identify what's the parent entity. But if you're doing an incremental crawl, then you have to specifically mention that whether it's time-based or is it changelog-based. And if it's changelog-based, it has to connect to the different file where the changelog entries are available. So that's what's there in the connector code. So out of the box, we've taken away any coding requirement for databases in WCFs. So if your external repository has WCF API or it's got an ODBC, then you're able to connect to it and just use SharePoint Designer and do sort of this very dumbed down walkthrough, and it creates a model file, pushes it into BCS onto your SharePoint farm, and you're ready to go. Now, if you have a fully custom solution that you have to go build, then you use Visual Studio, and you have to do the whole shebang of, you would have to create a SharePoint project and do go through the walkthrough that's available in Visual Studio. So I'm going to do a quick demo of a SharePoint Designer-based solution. And keep your fingers crossed that this is actually going to work. So this is a SQL database that's got a bunch of sessions. This was the Tech Ready that happened in July. This is all the sessions that were covered at Tech Ready. And so I wanted to build a connector and an indexing connector and be able to search content that's there in this repository. So what I do is I open SharePoint Designer. And the first thing that you would do is connect to a site, because when you build an indexing connector, you have to go upload it into a web app so that you can then actually search the content. So you connect to a site. Yes? This one's 2010. I had an older VM, yeah. But you can use this in 2013 as well. See, I told you the network is iffy. Any questions while we wait? Otherwise, I'll switch over to UI, the snapshots that I took. Yeah. What about it? So we have an HTTP crawler out of the box, but it doesn't do JavaScripts. It's not, well, it is the same thing, but it doesn't do JavaScripts. It does manage HTTP content, and it even supports anonymous crawling. But I think the web crawler is the one that had JavaScript, right, Morgan? Yeah. Yeah. You could build out a custom solution for that, but out of the box, what we have is something that just is a very simplistic HTTP crawler. Oh, yes. So yeah, sorry. So the question was enterprise. We had an enterprise crawler in 2010. Do we have an equivalent crawler available? And one of the things we don't is we don't have support for JavaScripts when in the out-of-the-box HTTP solution that we have. Okay, so this thing did open up. So the first thing I do is I go to external content type. For those unfamiliar with SharePoint Designer, it's a slightly different way of going and administering your site. And you can create sites, you can create lists. And for the purpose of what we're trying to do, we want to create an external content type. Because the SQL database, that's how we would identify that. So I'm going to click on external content type. And I'll give it a name. And I'm going to click here to discover external content types. I cheated. I had something available. If it wasn't, I would basically just click Add Connection and select one of the types that's available here. And I drill into this to the table that I want. And here I have the option of creating the operators that are required. For search, since we don't do any kind of write, we typically only need read-specific operations, but we're not going to do delete operations from here. But like I mentioned, BCS is a read-write platform for external content sources. But for the purposes of this demo, I'm just going to go ahead and create all operations. So what you'll see is sort of this, a navigation model of trying to go create your model file. And so it's going to confirm what kind of operators you have, and it's going to retrieve the data model inside of the table. And it's going to give you the option of selecting or deselecting stuff that if you don't want a particular column, it won't bring it in. For this one, I'll just leave it that way. The one thing I have to do is identify which is the unique column, the unique attribute. That's the code. I'm going to just select map to identifier. And So the other option here is to filter. So if you have a table that's got 1 million items and you don't want to crawl all 1 million, you can create filter parameters that make sure you bring in only a portion of that. In this case, I have barely like 250 sessions. So that's pretty much all I had to do to go create the operations. The one thing that I need to also call out here is just to make sure that when anyone's getting search results, so this thing goes and crawls all the tables, all the records in the table. But when it comes time to actually showing the results, we want one particular column to show up as the title. And so that's what I did over there. And so the last step over here is to go create profile page. And so what this does is it basically connects to the SharePoint web app that I started in the beginning where I opened the site. It connects back to that web app, and it uploads the model file there. And when everything goes according to expectation, it will show up in the web app over here. This is where all the model files that you would write will show up. So, okay, did that. So you'll see it's shown up over here, and now I'm ready to define a content source and start crawling it. So I'm going to go into search service application, and I click new content source, and I'm just going to say conference sessions. And I'm going to click on line of business data. And I'll select a particular external data source. And I will kick off a full crawl. And so this is the crawl log where, and the crawl history view where you have per crawl session statistics. So I'm just going to wait for it to show up over here. So you see that the conference session, I just kicked off a full crawl. It says type F, and it gives you the duration and gives you the numbers. And it takes about a minute. So while that goes through, any questions? Yes? Yep. Yes, it would. It's just you have to make sure that your topology is factoring in. So our scale-out unit is number of items in the index. And so as long as you have sufficient capacity there, and as long as, if a lot of people are hitting that, if there's a lot of scripts that are running against that SQL database, you will find latency to drop. But yes, you do have the opportunity of doing that. And you can always also implement incremental crawl logic to make sure you're just going against a timestamp and not trying to bring in everything. Yeah, go on. Yes, so the question is, how do you deal with security? Yes, you would have to build a custom solution in that case where you would actually call out where exactly the security descriptors are available, and you'd have to pull that in. Yes.
In 2010, I know you used SharePoint design in 2010, but in 2010 you couldn't do incremental crawl without going into the model file directly, if I remember right. You set up all the calls for 4 different procedure calls using, that's changed.
No, it's not. It's the same methods and you do have to actually open up the model file and make the changes there, or you have to call out which methods you would call for an incremental crawl, and which entity is going to be identified as a changelog or the parent item. And that stays the same. You had a question. One second. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Yep. Yeah, that's great feedback. One of the things we do is we run queries right against the database. That's really good feedback. We don't have in the current UI. I'll be sure to keep a note on that. By the way, I'm sorry, no, I'm not repeating the question. So the question here is the crawl history page, is it really interactive? Can I organize by different, can I filter based on different attributes? And the answer is, well, sorry, no. Yes? Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. Yes, it is. I'm glad you brought it up. So the MyFile connector was a sample code that we put out there. I'll admit it wasn't comprehensive enough. So the one that's going out in November, it actually has many more scenarios that we've added, and we've annotated the code enough that you will actually know what's going on. So. Go ahead. Uh-huh. Okay, unfortunately, I don't have that much of expertise, but I can hear the pain in your voice. I'll give you my business card if you can make sure to follow up. I'll put you in touch with my dev, and you guys can go pop off on that. Yes, you had a question. Yes, you. Yes. Yes. Continuous crawling is going to be configured in Office 365 when 2013 rolls out. I saw some hands up here. Yes. That's a great question. I don't have the answer to that one. I can definitely find out. Again, please, can you stop by afterwards, and I'll give you my information. Yes. Yes. Right, so the question is, can I combine a bunch of different repositories in a single search result? So the way you would do that is you have a way of doing reference to lookup. So when you build a custom solution, first of all, you would have to make that in a custom solution where each entity, so if you have two different repositories, the recruitment example would be a simple one where you have every applicant as a record in a table, and there's a little file path that points to the resume that's there in the file share. And so you can make sure that both of those are crawled as one entity and shows up in the search results. But you would have to do that in a full custom solution. And so you would model that as one entity, and you can call out which one is the title through that. Yes, go ahead.
Small question. The biggest problem with the crawl is the data space, right? So right now we are using fast search.
Mm-hmm.
We have a separate server. When we crawl our content, it takes a lot of data space and all that, and we cannot run this continuous crawl as long as data space will be an issue. So they just jack up, and you cannot
Sure.
run them continuously. What did you guys do for this? Did you ever have any optimization for data? Or I know there's some optimization has been introduced, like ribbon size and all that,
Uh-huh.
in the new version. Any improvement in the data?
I don't think I completely follow the question. So you're saying that you had to add more capacity and you were not getting the kind of performance?
Okay. The biggest problem with crawl is
Yes.
data storage, right? The data size is huge when you crawl, and your server side, and
Sure.
you're asking your network people to add more space to your SQL
Right.
and all that. So is there any improvement in any optimization or any change on
I think I'm going to point you to there's a modeling the capacity and modeling session that happens today, and not my area of expertise, unfortunately. That's indexing. Okay, I've run into some kind of a security problem. You're going to have to take my word for it that it actually does wrap up. I'll show you the snapshot over here. Sorry for... See, this is what I was doing yesterday evening, basically taking 25 snapshots of each step. So when you're done uploading the model file, and when you kick off the full crawl, that's what it looks like. And immediately after that, you get into, you have all of the items in the repository are crawled. And finally, I was able to successfully run a SharePoint search. And so what you see over there is the UI snapshot of the results, where I just look for SharePoint search-related sessions in TechReady. Sorry about that one. I can try troubleshooting that while I take some more questions, by the way. Go ahead. Yes? I'm sorry, so like and follow for external content sources? Yeah. So you could do that if, but you would have to go a slightly different approach, where you would rather than just try to index the content. So when you're trying to build a custom connector to an external repository, you're not bringing in the content inside of SharePoint. You're just taking the content, shredding it, and putting it in the index. So if you want to follow content, what you would do is you would actually create a BCS equivalent entity and make it copied over into SharePoint. And at that point, you can follow it and like it and stuff like that. Yes. Then you would have a duplicate entity inside of SharePoint, and you would go crawl that rather than try to crawl the native host. Yes? Great catch. The only new thing that went into the BCS connector framework was the claim support. Unfortunately, that's the one that we've added in this version. Other than that, there's been a lot of performance improvement where it gets way faster. But in terms of capability, no. Yes? Yes. Yep. Yes. So for those who didn't hear that, the question is there a way that I can customize my search experience where I only want to be able to get results out of my site as well as things that I'm interested in? So there's this thing called result scopes, result sources, and that's basically it sort of contains where your search results are going to come out of. And so people search is a type of result source. And you can actually go to Sano's session that's immediately after this one, and she'll show you how that works. You will, right? Yes. So we don't. Yes. In the case of Exchange, we only support public folders. We don't support. We don't bring in mail content because the way they store ACLs is different, and so you would achieve that through query federation. But you can define a result source where you stitch stuff that's coming out of the index as well as query federated stuff and make one scope. Yes. In 2010, yes, but that would also mean that you want to be able to crawl 2013 content using a 2010 federated farm, correct?
Well, I thought in 2013 was all crawling. All I wanted to do is use this index from 2010.
Yes, you can do that. You can do that. So the question is, yes, can you have content farm running 2010, and can you run 2013 as the service farm where search is running? Yes, you can. You can't do vice versa because we've done a bunch of improvements where the 2010 crawler won't be able to talk to the 2013 content farm. Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm. were you there for Atanu's session? Atanu had a session here. I think he was referring to that one. He's going to have another one tomorrow that addresses that one. I'm sorry, unfortunately, not my area of expertise. The question was that in 2010 we had the option of creating a out-of-the-box SPD walkthrough for WCF, for SQL and .NET. Has that expanded to all types of databases, or is it only for SQL? I know that we have ODBC support, but I don't know what's showing up in 2013 Designer. Just one sec. Before I proceed with questions, I actually literally have this one slide, and it's basically the takeaway slide. I wanted to, I want to open up for Q&A, but for those who want to rush out of here, the takeaways that I hope that you're going to walk away from here is that out-of-the-box freshness has gone from hours into, you can achieve 30 minutes out of the box. You can go achieve way better if you want to configure that. I hope that the coverage that we went into for the tools sort of emphasizes the attention that we gave to the search admin experience and the ability for an admin to isolate problems. And the last one is the comprehensive support. I acknowledge that the BCS connector framework hasn't gone through a huge sea change in the past release, but that's the direction that we want to take, at least for the next release going forward. So yes, go ahead.
Around customization, I was wondering if any time you spend actually documenting the APIs time. There are a lot of different methods that you can follow.
Yes.
Do you follow the examples?
We've heard the cries. I assure you, yes. So yeah, we've heard the cries. So the question again is, I think along the same lines as what you mentioned, where the documentation that went out for the custom solution on BCS wasn't quite there. And yes, we've totally addressed it. You will see the download by the end of November. And if you see areas that are not yet addressed, please get in touch with us. The MyFile connector, the sample is coming out, which has the documentation. And along with, we've got separate documentation that's coming out that says exactly, what are the methods that you have to implement and stuff like that.
Yeah, we've got a lot of that in general, but, what's the difference between the ID enumerator and the finder? What properties do you actually have to return in the finder versus the specific finder in order to get, certain things to work?
Yeah.
How do you specify a file extension? There are 4 different ways documented around the web. It's highly important to figure out which one is right.
I totally get. What I want to do is perhaps get you in touch with we have a search COE inside of Microsoft, and they're always there for very specific questions. If you think that there's something over there that we can address in the general documentation, yes, please feel free to reach out. Yes, you had a question. I'm sorry, I'll come to the side. Uh-huh. Yeah. You're talking about extensibility in the processing pipeline now? Yes, so there's a session that's going to happen immediately after this one, and Katrina is sitting right here, so just follow. What's that? Oh, I'm sorry, 5 o'clock. And that's going to be covered then. She's sitting right here. Yes, go ahead.
Possible to push content into the search?
Yes, I was waiting. That question did not come up. So, yeah, we don't have push right now, but it's high up on the radar in our planning but that answer is neither here nor there for you, so sorry. Sorry, the question was about do we have a push API to be able to push content in? And the answer is no in 2013, and very high up there on the radar for next release. Any other questions here? Yes, please.
Anything changed with the HTTP crawler? 2010.
Let me begin by asking you, was there anything on the wish list?
Yeah, so
By the way, the question was, did anything change in the HTTP crawler?
So HTTP crawler didn't handle cookies, JavaScript.
Oh, yeah, so there was a question that was asked there, yes. The only thing we added on our side, the enterprise web crawler was able to handle JavaScript, so we don't support that, but we do have anonymous crawling. So previously there was a redundant authorization that used to happen, even when you went for internet-facing sites where we would say that, hey, we're a SharePoint search crawler, and we would identify ourselves, so we've eliminated that, so. But that's the only change that's happened in 2010.
What part are you going to tell the people that are using that crawler that?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
So what's your strategy for people that are actually using that crawler, not just JavaScript, but
So in 2010, I'm sorry, I think I didn't completely gather the question. In 2010, we were supporting, in SharePoint Search, we were supporting cookies. We were able to do forms-based authentication on HTTP content.
No, it's not the same as I can tell it's the line from David. We couldn't get it to work in HTTP connector, but we will be able to get it forward.
I see.
So
Can we speak offline? I'd like to know more because I feel like I don't have sufficient context there. Yes.
coming from the fast side,
Yeah.
the fast crawler, which is very rich, very
Okay.
configurable. We are essentially asking ourselves the same question as we go to 2013. How will we be able to address some of the basic JavaScript is one, some of the other configurability and extensibility issues are another. Is the HTTP connector extensible at all? Or do you basically have to write your own VCS connector completely independent of the existing HTTP?
You would have to write one by yourself.
What's the time frame for expanding or extending or improving that?
That's the one that I want to have an offline conversation about. Yes. Go ahead, Jeff.
Also, if there's enough people and people want to gather the version of better, that depends on the
Okay. So group attack, basically.
You haven't gotten enough yet.
I guess so. The love. Yes, please, go ahead.
In 2010, PCS models, you made a change to the model, but you had to basically delete the old model out and import the model again, and then insert it would change the underlying BDC number, ID number, and then so all of the content that you had crawled before, basically, when you crawl the new models, it would basically duplicate all the data in your search results.
Yeah.
And you'd have to go through and wipe out your entire repot index for that.
I totally hear your concern.
Is that still the same way?
Unfortunately, it is. We haven't addressed that this time. The ongoing manageability, when you start changing, or even if you have dynamic content, we are aware of it. Unfortunately, we haven't addressed that one in this release.
Okay.
Yes.
What is the difference between continuous crawl and incremental, really? I mean, if it takes the same time to crawl,
Right.
So
No, it actually. So in the case of continuous crawl, we actually created a very different variation of a crawl, where so the thing we did not cover is that behind the scenes, in the case of a continuous crawl content source, we have this thing called a cleanup crawl. So in the case of incremental crawl, it does everything. It's like it goes and discovers new content, discovers all the changes, and processes the errors that we ran into the last time. In the case of continuous crawl, we basically shoot off the top two and only take care of changes. We don't try to do errors. We don't try to discover new content. And so what we do is we have a bunch of parallel crawls that are processing new changes, and we have cleanup crawls that run ever so often. Out of the box, they run every 4 hours, and so they handle the errors that we ran into. But what that means is you don't land up waiting behind errors, or you don't land up waiting because you can run it in parallel. You don't land up waiting behind deep crawls.
that's clean.
The cleanup crawl, yeah. Yeah, it's a cleanup crawl, which is a lot like an incremental crawl, but it won't process changes when you configure a continuous crawl. It'll just take care of. Yes. Right. So the question is the error messages. It was difficult to figure out exactly why things were erroring out. Right. So one of the things that we did this time. So there are times when you'll run into errors because it's a temporary glitch, where the repository will not respond, or there was a password reset and it wasn't updated, and so then you'll run into top-level errors. Or you would run into errors if, say, while you're crawling, you're not able to get access to the security descriptors at a given moment. The reason errors get taken, they go away when you do a recrawl, that is an indicator of temporary glitches. But What we've done in this release is we've taken all the error messages and we've made them, well, English. Before, there used to be a lot of these, hey, error H result, and then there used to be a hex code, and we've actually made it look like English, where we would say that you want to go check the default access account because we're not able to authorize with the host. Or we would say that the processing pipeline is not able to process it in time, so take a look at your topology. So if we have the processing pipeline is not able to respond within a certain period of time, we would get an error message and we would actually explain it in English that we likely have a topology problem. So that's kind of what we've done in this release. I don't know, however, if I'm answering your question, though. Does that answer your question? Okay, go ahead. Give me a second shot then. Right, so that's what I was mentioning. So, the error breakdown and the error log, when you go to crawl log, it's more easy to understand. But the other thing is the other thing, I don't know if you've looked into this, but ULS Viewer gives you a more detailed, log level view of what's going on inside of the system. But those are the two avenues that you have to figure out when you're trying to identify specific error messages or specific errors that you've run into. Those are the two tools that are available. Data optimization?
Yeah, you
There's
talk about data growth and all that.
Yes, so the capacity and modeling, that's by Barry and Olaf. I'll pull it up. No worries. Oh, thank you. Thanks. One sec. It's today at 5 p.m., Barry and Olaf. I need to mark that out. If you want, I'll do that. Hold on. Okay. Thank you.